Shatner Quake by Jeff Burke, Chapter 6. Bob walked up the film schedule to see what was currently showing. As he read, he absent-mindedly rubbed his chest. It was still sore from when the security guard had pushed him. According to the paper, Theater 2, which he was currently outside of, was in the middle of a Star Trek marathon. Bob grinned. This would make him feel better after all the shit that had already happened to him. The theater had a snack window just next to the door. Bob walked up to it to study the menu. A bag of popcorn was priced $18. Bob gasped. This was an atrocity. The crunchy popcorn coated with greasy movie theater pseudo-butter would surely hit the spot right now. He stood at the window grumbling to himself over having to endure yet another indignity. His outrage turned to annoyance as no salesperson appeared. He waited a few more minutes and decided to just go into the theater. He would rather sit and enjoy the adventures of the USS Enterprise than wait for some volunteer flaked off. When he entered the theater, he was surprised to see it was completely empty except for one lone person sitting in the center of the front row. It was strange to see such a large room so barren. Bob walked in and found himself a seat near the center. The man in front was loudly laughing and clapping his hands. He was oddly amused for an episode of Star Trek. Bob tried to ignore him and focus on the show. It seemed to be an episode that Bob didn't immediately recognize, which was strange because he'd seen every episode of the original series 67 times. Spock, McCoy, Sulu, and Chekhov were discussing the sudden disappearance of Captain Kirk. The characters seemed more scared and worried than Bob ever remembered seeing them. The man in front hooted, and Bob took his eyes off the screen and glared at him. The man was no longer there. Bob sat up to get a better view of the front row. The man was really gone. Bob sat back, relieved to be rid of the nuisance. He jumped, but he realized there was now someone sitting next to him. The man was facing him with a broad, slightly unhinged smile. The man leaned closer, and Bob gasped when he saw the face of William Shatner. "Hi, I'm Bill," said the man, offering his hand. My, you're a good-looking fellow." "Thanks," said Bob, shaking his hand. "We've already met." "Oh, we have?" Shatner's left eye twitched. "My mistake." Then the man was gone. One moment he was sitting next to Bob, and the next the seat was empty. Bob looked around confused and a little unnerved. Perhaps his mother was right and he really was going crazy over William Shatner. "If you're looking for a good price on airplane tickets, I know a place." Bob jumped and spun around. The Shatner was now sitting at his other side. "No, thanks." Bob was getting a little scared. He was sure this was not the real William Shatner. His suit was different from what he was wearing earlier, and it was not one of his public appearance suits. He was wearing one of the suits Shatner reserved for commercials. The man was acting very differently from how Shatner had when Bob met him in the signing room. Bob was also fairly sure that the real William Shatner did not have teleporting abilities, no matter how badass that would be. "How about a 4-star hotel at a 2-star rate?" eagerly asked the Shatner. "No, I don't want anything." Bob stood and went to leave. This guy was starting to get to him. Suddenly the man was in the row behind Bob, placed both of his hands firmly on Bob's shoulders and pushed back into the seat. "You're just stressed out. Sit back, relax, enjoy the show, and we can discuss business," said the Shatner as he started to give Bob a shoulder massage. Bob would have protested, but Shatner's hands felt so good. He watched the screen, and a red shirt walked out of the bridge. "Lieutenant Leslie," said Spock, "what are you doing away from your post?" Lieutenant Leslie pulled out a phaser and pointed it at Spock. "I'm here because I'm tired of taking orders from you Boy Scouts. There are going to be some changes around here." The Shatner continued to knead, and his grip was starting to get a bit uncomfortably hard. Watching the show was not helping Bob. He could feel a primal kind of panic creeping into his head. There was something very wrong here. To confirm Bob's suspicions, Lieutenant Leslie phasered Spock on the screen. McCoy ran to hold his dead friend. Leslie stood atop the captain's chair and let loose a series of laughs that would have made a mad scientist proud. Sulu and Chekhov bowed in worship of their new master. A chill went down Bob's spine. He jumped to his feet. "What's wrong?" asked the Shatner. He sounded genuinely concerned. "We'll talk business later," shouted Bob as he ran for the exit. "Come back! I can get you anything you want!" called the Shatner as Bob fled the theater. "This is too fucking weird," said Bruce as she paced back and forth. The small meeting room was crowded with people. They were beginning to get to her. "Calm down," said Bruce. He stood up and walked over to Bruce. He held her shoulders. I know, but think of it. We're going to be heroes, saints for the Bruce on high." She hugged Bruce, tears streaming down her face. "I know, but this is all a little too much to handle." "This is very touching." Bruce turned to face Denny Crane. "But time is wasting." Crane held out his hand. "So, do we have a partnership?" Bruce let go of Bruce and shook Crane's hand. "Excellent," said Crane. "Once you do what you need to, he's ours." The room was then full of excitement and talking. Bruce wiped the tears from her face and looked at the room full of Shatners. Through her blurred vision, she couldn't tell any of them apart. She looked to Bruce, who was standing next to Denny Crane. Crane's smile was a little big for her taste. Then she looked at Bruce, who was leaning against the side wall and had been remaining awfully quiet. His eyes met hers, and he nodded at her. "Too fucking weird," he said. Natalie could hear a strange buzzing sound, but could only see black. From somewhere near came the scent of strawberries. She felt very cold. The buzzing turned to a low drone as her vision faded in. She found herself looking through the windshield of an old ambulance at a banged and bloodied Shatner. About fucking time I found him. She tried to move but could not. Her body felt strange. Her waist throbbed and she couldn't feel her legs. She looked down and screamed. Her body had been cut completely in half by the vehicle. Her torso was sitting upright on the hood of the ambulance, and that was all that was holding in her innards. Thick, dark blood oozed from where she met the metal. Despite suffering extreme physical trauma, Natalie Albright remained conscious and aware of her situation. Natalie stifled her cries, and looked to see another Shatner standing next to the wreckage. He was standing near the wreckage but wasn't looking at her. He was staring intently off into a corner of the room. She looked in that direction, but there was nothing there. "Please, help me," she said. Victims of similar injuries have been known to live for up to hours after having the incapacitating incident. They never survived movement attempts by rescuers. Please, will she survive, or will she be yet another tragic story in this already dreadful day? Stay tuned to this special convention edition of Rescue 911. He stood still and stared straight ahead, waiting for the commercials to start. Natalie weakly coughed up black, speckled blood. "And we're off," said the Shatner, as his pose noticeably relaxed. He reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a handful of chocolate candy. He popped one into his mouth. "This is going to be really great stuff," he said through a full mouth. "Full of drama. You're really good. Oh, here, you want one?" The Shatner tossed her a piece of candy. Natalie reached to catch it purely out of reflex. A sudden movement was enough to throw her off balance. She tipped over. Her torso hit the metal with a dull thump. She moaned loud as her blood and insides rushed out. Shatner chewed and watched a red wave of viscera run down the hood of the ambulance. Natalie tried lifting an arm toward him, but it fell down limp. He regarded the situation for a moment, and then went off in search for the next segment. Shatner coughed and woke up, still strapped into the ambulance seat. He unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and fell out of the smoking, mangled vehicle. He crawled forward a few feet on his hands and knees, coughing. He got to his feet and was amazed to find himself uninjured. His suit was torn in a few places, but other than that, he was unscathed. He turned to the wreckage and saw that he was the only one who'd made it out okay. Natalie had been severed in half at the waist from the airborne ambulance. Top half of her was on the roof. A splatter trail of entrails led from the front of the vehicle to the lower half of her body, which was next to the debris. T.J. Hooker had been crushed between the ambulance and the doors, chest cavity torn wide open. Spilling from the large wound were buckets of the black goop and what looked to be film stock. The reels looked as if they'd been tightly stuffed into his body, but were now unwound onto the vehicle's hood. Shatner was less concerned about this strange sight as he was over at the entrance. It looked like someone had placed a giant television on the other side. The channel turned dead static. Every inch of the glass was displaying the snow show. He stood staring at the strange sight, then moved to one of the front doors the flying ambulance did not destroy. He pushed the revolving door, but it would not budge. He rushed back to the center of the lobby. By now, other people had wandered into the room and noticed a wall of static on the other side of the exit. They were so distracted by the sight that they didn't even notice the William Shatner was amongst them. Shatner ran over to the registration table and grabbed a map of the convention. He looked it over, trying to figure out what to do next. The convention staff had been no help so far. What the fuck was with T.J. Hooker trying to kill him? He studied the various room listings. Theater? No. Filking? No. Fan fiction readings? No. Dealer's room? That was it. The dealer's room was most likely where the other guests at the convention would be. Shatner flipped through the program trying to find the guest list, but could not. No matter. The dealer's room is just down that hall. There'd be somebody who could help me. Someone like me. A celebrity. Shatner went jogging in the direction of the dealer's room as the lobby filled with shocked and worried convention attendees.